Welcome back, Captain. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and stay till the end, because today's story is about a ship that refused to surrender even when surrounded, burning, and broken. This is the story of the cruiser that refused to die, USS Houston. The year was 1942, and the Pacific was on fire. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's navy swept through the South Pacific with unstoppable force. Allied ships were sinking one after another, and the United States was fighting just to hold the line. But one ship, one American heavy cruiser, would not back down. Her name was USS Houston, CA-30, known to her crew as the Galloping Ghost of the Java Coast. She had already survived multiple bombings, torpedo attacks, and ambushes that should have destroyed her. Every time, she came back, scarred but defiant, her flag still flying. When her fleet was shattered in the disastrous Battle of the Java Sea, Houston and the Australian cruiser HMAS Perth were ordered to retreat through the Sunda Strait. It was supposed to be a safe passage. But fate had other plans. On the night of February 28, 1942, the two cruisers sailed through the dark waters, unaware that they were heading straight into the path of the Japanese invasion fleet, dozens of transports escorted by destroyers, cruisers, and even battleships. As the first searchlights cut through the darkness, Houston's lookouts shouted, "Enemy ships! Range close!" Within seconds, the sea erupted. Shells screamed through the night, torpedoes sliced through the black water. The sky turned white with explosions. The Australian ship Perth fired first, blazing away at impossible odds. Houston joined her, her 8-inch guns roaring, hitting transport after transport, setting Japanese ships ablaze. Together, they fought like cornered lions, two ships against an entire fleet. The night became chaos. Torpedoes raced from every direction, some missing by meters, others exploding nearby, throwing men and steel into the air. Shells smashed through Houston's decks, killing dozens, but she kept firing. Her ammunition stores were almost empty, her engines hit, yet her crew refused to stop. At one point, a torpedo ripped into Perth, she exploded, her lights vanishing into the sea. Houston was alone. The Japanese surrounded her, firing from all sides. Captain Albert Rooks, already wounded, stood on the bridge shouting orders until another explosion took his life. Still, his crew fought on. The last shells were fired manually, each round loaded by men covered in blood and oil. Then came the final strike. 2 torpedoes hit near the engine room. The ship shook violently, lights flickered out, and the order came, "Abandon ship." But even as the water rushed in, Houston's gunners stayed at their posts, firing the last of their weapons into the darkness. Survivors remembered the band playing the national anthem as the cruiser slowly rolled and slipped beneath the waves. The time was 12:35 a.m., March 1, 1942. Of the nearly 1,000 men aboard, only 368 survived. The rest went down with their ship, choosing death over surrender. Those who lived were captured and forced into brutal labor camps along the Burma-Thailand Railway, later known as the Death Railway. Many never returned. But the story of USS Houston did not end there. In the years that followed, rumors spread through the Pacific, whispers of an American cruiser that kept appearing in battle reports long after she had sunk. Japanese sailors spoke of a ghost ship firing from the shadows, vanishing into smoke. The legend of the Galloping Ghost of the Java Coast was born. Decades later, divers found her wreck at the bottom of the Sunda Strait, her guns still aimed toward the horizon, her flagpole still standing. Even in ruin, she looked ready to fight again. The USS Houston was not just a ship, she was a symbol. A reminder that courage can outlive steel, and that even in defeat, honor can echo louder than victory. She went down fighting, surrounded by enemies, her crew unbroken, her spirit immortal. The cruiser that refused to die, USS Houston. Even after her destruction, the legend of the USS Houston would not sink. For decades, sailors across the Pacific spoke her name in awe, the cruiser that fought against an entire fleet. The ship that went down with her guns still blazing. The Japanese themselves were stunned. When they examined the wreckage and prisoner reports, they realized that the two Allied cruisers, Houston and Perth, had faced a force of over 50 enemy ships, including destroyers, cruisers, and even a battleship, and still managed to sink 3 transports and damage several escorts before being overwhelmed. It wasn't just a battle, it was defiance written in fire. The survivors who were captured faced horrors that would break most men. They were sent to labor camps across Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Japan, forced to build the infamous Death Railway, the same project that later inspired the film Bridge on the River Kwai. They were starved, beaten, and worked to exhaustion, many dying before ever seeing home again. But even there, the spirit of the Houston lived on. Prison guards spoke of how the American sailors never lost their discipline or pride, how they still sang, still saluted, still called themselves the Houston crew. Among them was boatswain's mate First Class Walter E. Johnson, who kept a secret diary carved into scraps of bamboo. In one entry, he wrote, "We will not die forgotten. The sea remembers." He was right. When the war finally ended and the survivors returned home, they carried with them the story of their ship and her captain Albert H. Rooks, who had refused to abandon the bridge and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. In his citation, the words were simple but powerful, for extraordinary heroism and courage beyond the call of duty. In the years that followed, the Houston became more than a memory, she became a monument. The city of Houston, Texas, her namesake, adopted her as a symbol of strength and sacrifice. Every year, on March 1st, veterans and citizens gather to honor her fallen crew. They read the names of the men who went down with her and those who suffered in captivity. Bells toll over the harbor, echoing across the water like the heartbeat of a ghost. Then came the divers. In the 2010s, underwater archaeologists found her resting 120 feet below the surface of the Sunda Strait. The wreck was covered in coral, her guns silent but still aimed toward the sky. Time had claimed her steel, but not her soul. Inside, the divers found helmets, shoes, and even porcelain cups still neatly arranged in the galley, as if her crew had only just stepped away. One diver said it best, "She's still standing guard." The USS Houston was never meant to win that battle, she was meant to fight it. Her stand delayed the Japanese advance, buying precious time for Allied forces regrouping across the Pacific. Her destruction became a rallying cry for the U.S. Navy, proof that even in hopeless situations, courage could still burn brighter than firepower. Even now, 80 years later, her name is spoken with respect. She is remembered not as a victim, but as a symbol of unbreakable resolve. Beneath the calm waters of the Sunda Strait, she rests not as wreckage, but as a shrine. The sea has taken her, but her legacy sails on in every ship that bears the American flag, in every sailor who knows what it means to fight to the very end. The waves whisper her story still, of courage against impossibility, of loyalty beyond death, of a ship that refused to surrender. USS Houston, the cruiser that refused to die. Decades after the war ended, the story of the USS Houston became part of American naval legend, a tale told not just in classrooms or history books, but in the hearts of sailors who swore they would never forget her. Veterans of the Pacific called her the ship with 9 lives, and some believed her ghost still watched over the Java Sea, protecting those who crossed the same waters where she fell. The Japanese sailors who had faced her that night would later describe their shock not at her firepower, but at her refusal to die. Even after taking dozens of direct hits, she fought like something alive, unwilling to surrender. In 1973, divers first confirmed her location, though much of her hull remained hidden beneath layers of coral and sand. Later expeditions revealed the scale of her final moments: shell holes along the waterline, collapsed gun turrets, and twisted metal torn open by explosions. Yet even in ruin, she looked proud. The bridge, where Captain Albert Rooks made his last stand, was still recognizable. The forward guns were frozen mid-turn, aimed defiantly toward the horizon. The brass lettering of her nameplate was faint but unmistakable: Houston. For the survivors, seeing those images decades later brought tears. Many had believed their ship was gone forever, erased by war and time. Now, they knew she still existed, sleeping beneath the waves, preserved by the silence of the sea. When the last survivor of the Houston passed away in the early 2000s, the U.S. Navy sent a wreath to be laid above her resting place. The note read, "To our shipmates who fought without fear, your watch is over. The sea keeps you, but your nation remembers." The wreck became a war grave, protected by law and by reverence. But her story did not end even there. Over the years, researchers discovered that artifacts from the Houston were appearing on the black market, scavenged by looters who dared to disturb her resting place. Outrage swept through both the U.S. and Indonesia. Veterans groups demanded her protection. Soon after, Indonesian and American naval divers joined forces to guard the site, two nations once enemies, now united to honor the dead. Today, the USS Houston remains under watch. The currents of the Sunda Strait flow quietly above her, carrying the sound of passing ships, none of which know that beneath them rests a legend. She lies tilted slightly to port, her guns pointing into the depths, her flag long gone but her spirit untouched. Divers say that when the sunlight filters down through the blue water, it falls directly onto her deck like a spotlight from heaven, as if the ocean itself refuses to let her fade into darkness. Historians call her the last stand of the old world, a moment when men fought not for victory, but for honor. The Houston had no chance of survival, yet she fought harder than any ship that did. Her name became a promise that courage can exist even in defeat, and that valor never needs a witness. 80 years later, every new U.S. Navy cruiser that bears her name carries a small bronze plate taken from the original ship, a piece of the past welded into the future. When sailors touch it before battle, they say it feels warm, as if alive. And maybe it is. Maybe the Houston never left the sea at all. Maybe she still sails, unseen, just below the surface, her engines silent, her guns ready, her captain still at his post. The cruiser that refused to die, her body sleeps, but her spirit sails forever. They say legends never truly sink, and in the case of the USS Houston, that might be true. Long after her final battle, her name became sacred to those who understood what courage really means. In naval academies across the United States, her story is taught not as one of defeat, but of duty. Cadets learn about the night she stood alone in the Sunda Strait, surrounded by fire and steel, and how her crew refused to abandon their guns even as the sea rose around them. It's said that during night drills, when ships cut their engines and the ocean goes still, some sailors swear they can hear faint echoes of guns in the distance, 3 salvos, like a heartbeat under the waves. They call it Houston's Echo. The Indonesian fishermen who work those same waters tell their own tales. On calm nights, when the moon is high in the sea like glass, they say a dark shadow sometimes glides beneath their boats, a shape too long, too straight to be a whale. Some refuse to cast their nets there, believing the place is haunted by the souls of the men who died fighting. Others drop flowers into the current as an offering of respect. To them, the wreck of the Houston is no grave, it is a guardian. When divers descend into her silent world, they describe a strange stillness that feels alive. The temperature drops, and a pressure seems to hang in the water, as if the ship is watching. The light from their torches falls on steel that once shook with life, the place where men stood shoulder to shoulder, loading shells, shouting orders, believing they could hold the line. Now, the same decks lie buried in coral, home to fish that drift through the empty gun barrels like ghosts. Yet nothing about her feels dead. She rests with dignity, not as a ruin, but as a monument carved by the sea itself. In the United States, the legacy of the Houston endures through her namesake ship, USS Houston, SSN 713, a nuclear-powered submarine that proudly carries her banner. During the commissioning ceremony, veterans of the original Houston stood at attention, their eyes wet with pride. One of them whispered, "She's back." And in a way, she was. The spirit of the cruiser that refused to die now sailed once more, not on the surface this time, but beneath the waves, eternal as the ocean itself. Every March, the city of Houston holds its memorial. The crowd gathers beside a reflecting pool, its surface rippling like the sea. Bells toll once for every 100 men who went down. The names are read aloud, and for a moment, time stops. You can almost hear the hum of engines, the thunder of distant guns, and the quiet courage of men who faced the impossible with unbroken hearts. Some legends live in books, others in monuments. But the USS Houston lives in the tide, in every wave that rolls through the Sunda Strait, in every storm that sweeps across the Java Sea, and in the heart of every sailor who knows what it means to fight without hope and still refuse to fall. Her story is not just about war. It's about honor, about endurance, about the kind of bravery that cannot be measured in victories or medals. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, in the silent dark, she remains. Her guns forever aimed toward the horizon. Her captain forever on watch. Her spirit forever alive. USS Houston, the cruiser that refused to die. The ship that became eternal. And so, beneath the warm, silent waters of the Sunda Strait, the USS Houston rests, scarred, broken, yet still standing guard. The ocean has claimed her body, but not her soul. Around her, the currents whisper the names of the men who refused to surrender, who fought until the very last shell, who faced an entire fleet and still chose defiance over despair. Their courage did not sink with them, it rose above the waves, carried by time, remembered by all who sail beneath the same sky. She may be covered in coral and shadow now, her guns rusted and her decks quiet, but her story is louder than ever. Every ripple above her is a salute, every passing ship a silent promise that her sacrifice was not in vain. The USS Houston was not destroyed, she was immortalized. Her steel sleeps, but her spirit sails forever. And when the tides shift and the night falls over the Java Sea, the moonlight touches her resting place like a blessing, and for a moment, it feels as though her engines still hum, her flag still waves, and her captain still stands on the bridge, looking toward the horizon. The cruiser that refused to die, USS Houston. Lost to the sea, but never to history.